advocating for yourself, yes. But, you also have to deliver results at the same time. Learning to kind of have really productive conversations is so important for growth and your overall happiness too, because nobody is going to care about your career as much as you. Maybe your mom, but really, you are having to be the one that has to advocate for yourself. Still let your personality shine, right? Because sometimes I have people that are just yes, and this is, and it's just deadpan. In an industry like this, guests do not respond well to that, trust me.
Hello and welcome to this episode of OysterLink's podcast. Today I have a very special guest. Her name is Renee and she is a recruiting manager at Marriott. Renee, please do the honors and tell our audience a little bit more about yourself.
Of course, yes. So I've been in the hospitality industry, I say since I was 14, kind of illegally working in kitchens at summer camps. But have worked predominantly within food and beverage and restaurant spaces, joined Marriott shortly after graduating college, and have then since transitioned into kind of this more talent acquisition recruiting space to help with early careers. So specializing in internship recruitment as well as postgraduate manager and training type opportunities.
Amazing. So you seem like the perfect fit to answer the many questions our audience has. But before we jump to that, you just mentioned you were in the hospitality since you were 14. So it seems like you always knew it's going to be hospitality. What drew you to this industry?
Yeah, so at first it was kind of just summer job, something to get out of my hometown, something a little different. And then going off to college, I actually went to school. I changed my major 4 times, that era of self-discovery of our youth. Predominantly spent actually a lot of my college career in nursing. And then just one day I kind of woke up and was like, this can be a little bit depressing. And at the time I was working at a restaurant as a host or a server. I don't recall where I was. And loved it, loved how fast my shifts went by, loved the different pace every day. You just spend so much of your life working, and for your shifts to fly by and to actually kind of have fun doing it is really important for me. And so that's really where I think my true love was founded. It's ironic because in high school, my mom's like, maybe you should consider doing hospitality. And, as a rebellious teen, I'm like, Mom, you don't know anything. So of course, years later when I decided to have it as my career and when I actually got my degree in, I'm like, man, mother does know best sometimes.
If we only listened to our mothers before, right?
Hindsight's always 20/20. So.
Of course. Thank you, Renee. So since you covered a lot of different roles in your early days of your hospitality career, could you kind of take a look back and tell us what were some of the best moments of being a host and then a manager? And then how did you find the transition to this talent acquisition and hiring?
Yeah. So I think as far as hostess position, I worked at a restaurant in Long Beach, California. It's massive and 2 restaurants in one, 3 stories tall. And so I really got good. You had to get good at hosting, right? Because we had indoor, outdoor. I think it was over 115 tables, just easily did 500 covers a night. And so I love puzzles. So I think that hostess kind of plotting reservations and getting really savvy with reservation books was kind of my favorite part of hosting, and just every day was so different. So that was really, really fun. And kind of that skill set is kind of what got me into a supervisory role at that restaurant. And then, yes, I went through, Marriott has a manager and training program. Marriott International is where I work now. And so I used that to go into a kind of assistant manager role. And that was out at a Ritz-Carlton in Tucson, Arizona. So kind of learning the Ritz-Carlton standards and that ultra premium luxury service delivery was really, really fun. especially kind of being on the manager side of things, because I had done an internship in food and beverage as well in at a Ritz-Carlton in Laguna Niguel, California. And that was more of this, I was like a server. And so kind of learning the line level style of service, whereas being on the manager side of things was really, really fun because I was really getting to kind of create those really special over the top service moments for guests. You know, we call them wow moments, you know, getting to run to pastry to make a custom cake because it's somebody's pearl anniversary. And those were really things that I just really found so fun about this industry. But then kind of was working my way up in management at in San Diego. And then ultimately this role became available. And because I had done both our kind of internship space and that manager in training program, as well as being a department head of 5 restaurants, kind of getting to see the HR side of things. You know, you have to get good at policy and procedure when you're managing 180 associates and 6 leaders. So that kind of helped to transition into the more talent acquisition space. Never ever did I want to be in an HR space. Never thought I was interested in it, to be totally honest. But really it's that having to be fair and consistent as a leader is kind of what segued me into this space a little bit. So
amazing. That's such a rich career. Okay, let me jump into the very interesting, and I assume something that our audience is dying to know. Can you tell us more about the Marriott internship programs? How to get those, how to apply for them, how long does it take? What do they need to kind of like complete? What are some of the requirements?
Yes. So for the internship program itself, those are like hotel based. You have to be in pursuit of your bachelor's degree or associate's degree if you're going for like a culinary role, because like culinary, we just like to see that skill set. And so that's the minimum qualification, that and that you have current work authorization in the US. So I find most students that are in school, you're going to have a work visa if you're not from US, or if you are a US citizen, then you would qualify for those. They're very much entry-level hourly positions. So really it's to kind of get your foot in the door, experience maybe a position that you wouldn't have normally tried. I always say it's kind of like a perfect test subject because you're only having to do it for usually 10 weeks. So if you hate it, you know there's an end date in 10 weeks. So because, you know, I feel like you get so much knowledge with every different position you have. And even if it's something that's not your cup of tea, really just do what you can to try to like learn from those positions. Because sometimes when you're in those uncomfortable positions, that's when your greatest learnings can happen, I find. But all of those roles can be found on just like the Marriott Careers website. You can actually set up job pages and receive job alerts for like both front and back of house roles. It's in a variety of different departments or positions. And then as far as like our postgraduate opportunity, that would be for either you're going to graduate by September of the following year or have graduated in the last 24 months, and those ones are, we would pay for your relocation. You start as an assistant manager. If you're in the kitchen, you're essentially as like a sous chef is the position you would come in as. Predominantly those culinary roles are going to be more on the food line versus baking and pastry. Baking and pastry is one that we don't have a ton of need for, to be totally transparent. It's very, very popular. I think that's part of it. But yes, and it's just a year program. And then after that year, you're able to apply to any position within Marriott that you would want.
Okay, amazing. And would you say that the people who go through the internship have like a better chance of actually landing a job at Marriott?
I say yes and no, because I don't want to say that we discriminate for those that haven't, right?
Of course.
Because all experience is good experience. But we do give priority scheduling to those who have gone through the internship program. And what I mean by that is we open the jobs a month, like for that voyage program, we open those a month before and have kind of like a link just for those people. And then we post them to the public. So they kind of get first dibs is what I say on the jobs before the public.
Amazing. But that can be such a good head start, having a whole month to, I mean, it's amazing. Okay, great. Thank you. So we just mentioned that pastry is not that much in demand when it comes to internships and then also to applying for jobs. But what are some positions you can share with the audience are kind of like in high demand at the moment?
Yeah, so I would say like I mean, we cover a variety of positions. I'll list kind of most of them. We'll say we have like banquets, event planning, HR, sales, accounting, engineering, culinary, rooms operations, and food and beverage operations are our main ones. Now, the ones that are most desirable, I usually get scooped up in that first month or two. So we post our roles in September, kind of when the school year starts. And so most of those like event planning, HR, sales, they're all off the board already. Our highest demand and the highest requested from our hotels is just think about what it takes to run the actual hotel are going to be those rooms roles. So that front office housekeeping space or food and beverage, which is our restaurant space. That's where my background is. That's what I did my internship and my voyage program in. And I don't know, I really loved doing specifically food and beverage at a hotel. I loved the independent restaurant life as well, but there is something really fun about having multiple outlets that you're jumping around in, having multiple menus to kind of be aware of different styles of service at different spaces. And the guest recovery piece is always really, really fun because at a standalone restaurant, they leave if, maybe the meal doesn't go as well as we had hoped. They leave usually upset. Whereas if they're on property, you have that opportunity to win them over in the days that they're still staying with you. So I really kind of got addicted to that part of it. Sorry, that was a little tangent, but that was just something that I have really appreciated about the lodging piece of at least the restaurant industry.
Amazing. I also used to love doing service recovery. It just makes you feel so good when you do it. And you turn someone from a grumpy face to a super happy face. So is that maybe one of the questions that you used to ask people while you were directly involved with the hiring process or now with the internships? If not, what are your top 3 interview questions?
Yes, so we do a style of interviewing, and I find most places do a style of interviewing similar. We call it like STAR or behavioral based interviews. Corporate America, we love our acronyms. So STAR is kind of the format. It stands for situation, task, action, and result. Essentially, that's kind of the format of what you're going to tell me the story in. So usually we're going to ask questions like, tell me about a time when you went above and beyond to make a customer happy. Walk me through it. And so that's when you're painting that story of like, what was the situation? What was the task you were tasked with, the action you took? And use those I statements, right? So often I find candidates will say, oh, we did this or my manager did this. And that's not showing what you were doing in that moment to shine. And, I want to see why you are a star, right? So not to play on words with star there, but
so no pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. No pun intended. So those are just kind of things that I usually say to just be aware of when you're talking through an interview. It's the time to be, kind of self-absorbed, right? This is what I want from you. But so it'll be questions, yes, usually about service, typically or something about working in a team, right? Because if you've ever worked in any space of hospitality, that communication and teams space is so important. So maybe something about tell me about a time you made a contribution to a team's success. And then the last area that I think there's multiple key competencies, but I'd say the third one that we usually ask about is kind of either like adaptability or kind of how do you kind of prioritize in a stressful situation? So yeah, tell me about a time where you were overwhelmed. What did you do? And kind of help us walk through what your thought process was during that time. Because if you've ever worked in a restaurant or any sort of hospitality space, there's no way you've never been overwhelmed.
That's similar to what I ask my people who are joining our social media team now. Is like, have you ever tried to communicate with the meta support? Is equivalent to what we used to ask as well. I used to be a flight attendant, so that was one of the things that you would ask people. Is like, tell me one time and if people say, oh, I was never overwhelmed, you would be like, okay. Good for you, but how?
Yeah. I need whatever you had for breakfast that morning because, yes.
I want a piece of that as well, right? Okay, exactly. Amazing. Thank you so much. So let me ask you a question that you just gave me an inspiration for. What would be your advice for job seekers, how to kind of evaluate the resources out there? I don't want to be like offensive to anyone, but like this kiosk psychology, so kiosk recruiters do.
Oh, yeah.
And so how would you tell them to navigate?
I think in general, just what I usually do, at least before my interviews, I've gone through multiple of those where, yes, I'll write down tons of questions and just kind of start practicing them. The biggest thing is how you format your answer. So being kind of concise, I think, is a big part of it. Most of those questions that you see are good examples to get like your thoughts flowing and get those ideas and examples kind of at the tip of your tongue. I always say, like, don't be afraid to take notes into an interview. Like that's not inappropriate. I frequently do and say, can I just like reference my notes? And so I'll kind of briefly glance through what example maybe from my experience would be the best for this. Because that will definitely make you feel more prepared in the moment. But the other thing is really making sure to paint the picture. So sometimes people, when they forget the setup a lot of the time. So they just go, okay, so there's a day where there was busy and I'm like, where were we working? Like, what was our position? Right. So kind of take that time to set up the story. Again, remember that middle part using those I statements. And then the result also gets forgotten a lot. So they'll just kind of stop after like the action they took. And so very often, if you've ever interviewed with me and I've said, and how did I end up? That's because you didn't ever actually finish up the result piece. And so it's fine. We'll ask those follow-up questions. But I find like truly just practicing. I will basically be in my house walking around, asking myself questions, looking like a crazy person when I'm prepping for an interview, just talking to myself, pacing in my house. That alone helps you to get that kind of, I would say, the flow of it right. And then you'll realize when you're rambling in certain areas that you can kind of cut out some of the unnecessary details. So just, yeah, really focusing on adding enough detail, but not too much or not too little. I don't know, that's not like a perfect answer. But I'm always happy to like help somebody with a virtual interview or prep or anything like that.
Oh, amazing. That sounds like an open invitation now. Don't forget that we have 220,000 people coming to the website.
It's okay. It's okay. I'll just, I still respect my schedule. I do have office hours at times. So it'll be like maybe 15, 20-minute bursts, but
Oh, amazing. So this is like the biggest gift that you can give to someone is sharing your knowledge. Thank you so much, Renee.
Of course.
So now let's take it a step back because I like asking questions without any order, as you can see.
I love it. Thanks.
How to actually format a CV so that it kind of like stands out from the crowd? Because for me, as someone who's hiring, that's one of the things that it's the hardest, just judging people based on one piece of paper. So how do you do it? And what should the prospect candidates do?
So this is something I've become much more passionate about being in this role. I'll say first things first, don't forget to put your contact information on there. There's a shocking number that I get with no contact information. And I'm like, well, you would have been great, but I don't know how to get in touch with you. Luckily, I think at least Marriott's application links require at least an email in there. But yes, if you are applying, the other thing, just mindful, some of these auto responses go to your junk folder. So be sure you are actively checking your junk folders if you are applying, because I get lots of no responses as a result. Anyway, I digress. So that's the number one, I would say at the very beginning, very basic. And then the formatting itself is very interesting. So a lot of these softwares that companies will use, some of them, they use AI to scan. And so if you have columns, that really messes with that software. So doing a linear, I used to have columns. I thought it was so cute. I had a cute little resume, loved the look, had a little gray box, so it was kind of offset. It's just things that I've learned in this role. The reality is a linear one will work better. And yeah, be careful of doing like bullets sometimes. I mean, it's hard not to, but sometimes you'll notice if you ever have it autofill on an application, how it kind of messes that up. There's not really a workaround for that as of now, but just being mindful of at least the symbols you're using. Don't use anything too unique, because then that'll mess up that software as well. And then when you're talking through your bullets, like if you're in an entry level or kind of entering into your career, I understand that you maybe don't have as many tangible things to note. So you can just kind of describe maybe things that you did. But as much as possible, under those subheadings of when you're describing the role, saying things that you directly impacted, versus like I'll see people say host is like the description, and then they'll say had to seat people at tables. And at the end of the day, I know what a host does, right? So I don't need the description of what the host does. Tell me that you were the head host and you did all the training. Tell me that you were responsible for the retail inventory, or whatever, right? Those specialized things that maybe you directly had an impact in, versus using fillers to describe kind of the role itself. So that's one. If you have anything you can quantify, that is amazing. So any percentages, or time period, you want to say a time period of when, right? So if you say like reduced productivity by 15 or 2%, but you want to say in what time frame as well. So don't forget to kind of say the when of it all. It's something I find myself all the time. If I ever make edits, I go, okay, somebody please look at it. And I always make that mistake. I love to forget that one. And then I would say the skills section is the last part I'll just kind of harp on here. Well, actually, no, length of resume is big too. Really, 1 page, I would say, unless maybe you're after 10 years in your career. Like, and I'm talking post-grad career probably, or like 10 years established. You shouldn't need 2 pages. I just went to 2 pages and I've been working since I was 14. So that's just another one. Because it's just when you're having these people that are looking at hundreds of resumes a day, once they see the second, they're not even going to the second page a lot of the time because it's just so many. But the skills section is the last thing I will touch on. And that's because it's not needed a lot of the times nowadays, unless it's like a really specialized skill. So if you know like a POS software, or if you know reservation software and you're really proficient, you're expert level, list that. Microsoft Office, I feel like anymore, you learn that in kindergarten, right? We don't need to list that. We know Microsoft Office anymore, to be totally frank. And I'm sorry if that comes off blunt, but I just feel like that's pretty standard. So really those skill sets, like saying like I'm a detail-oriented person, don't put that in there, because half the time those people that put that in there, they've misspelled 3 things in their resume. And I'm like, where's that detail-oriented nature? And so I say it's usually use it as more of like specialized skills within software or certifications is really how that section should be used. And if it's going to just take up a bunch of space on your resume, you can probably omit that or the objective, one or the other.
Okay, those were actionable tips, and I love you for giving those. It's not generic. So I know that if I ever want to go back to hospitality on that side, I would put my Vineset training, obviously, because that's something that not a lot of people have, but I wouldn't put Microsoft Word.
Yeah, I just mentioned that because I see it so often, and I'm just like, I feel like everybody's proficient in that now.
I mean, it would be concerning. Like, my mom is also proficient. My grandparents are okay. I'm not going to say they're like proficient, but they're okay. They know how to use it. So I would assume that anyone below the age of 80 kind of has the grip of...
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. My stepdad's 75 and he is so good at Excel. So like...
Exactly, right? Okay, amazing, super. So how long can the hiring process take for an entry role versus a management position? What can the candidates actually expect? Because that's one question that we get asked a lot, working with the clients as well with the job seekers, is like, oh, when can I get and expect feedback? I know it's individual, but Marriott is obviously super big and most of the people want to be a part of such an organization. Yeah. So what can they expect?
So I will try to be as specific while being vague at the same time, because it does depend kind of on the person, the position a little bit.
Of course.
I would say our internships, my team used to only recruit for those. So it was a little bit tighter timeline. Now the hotels, they decentralized that a few years back. So that means like the hotels themselves are recruiting. So they're not as quick. We are trying our best to kind of reinvent that process right now. But ultimately they are kind of letting the roles fill, or just like have lots of applications come in, I should say. And then they will tackle it maybe in a few months. So that one, it really depends on the hotel. So I would say anywhere between like a month to 2 months. And I would say that goes for a lot of our direct placement, which is what we call like if you just directly apply to a role on property. Those are going to be, all of those roles are considered aged, those job postings, after 60 days. Internships and the Voyage program are different. We have different kind of length of position for those. But if you are applying to something on the Marriott website, if it's been posted 45 days ago, I honestly would not apply, because they're either going to cancel the job, or they have somebody that they're going to cancel and repost it. So then you're going to want to wait for that reposted job so that you can be one of the first applicants in that new requisition. Or they have already found somebody. They're just like finalizing that pre-hire check process, and then the position will close once the person accepts the offer. So kind of, a little key for success there. Those are mainly looking to be filled no more than 60 days. And then for the Voyage program, though, I always say I am as fast as you are. Every single day, I am in there moving you to the next step if you've completed the next step of the process. I would say on average, most students, at least my candidates, would complete their total process within 2.5 weeks. So that's from application to offer. And that's a slightly longer period, I would say, than years prior, but that's fine. I let them take their time for the most part. There is a time where I'll have to give deadlines of like, okay, we still need to reminder, we need to keep moving in the process, because I get it. Students are in school, they have midterms, they have clubs, jobs, so many different things going on. But the fastest I've ever done the whole process for us was within 48 hours. So the person applied, did all the steps, interviewed, and we had the offer within 48 hours.
Oh my gosh. That's so fast.
They were on top of it.
Okay, respect. I hope that they're still a part of your team. I mean, of the Marriott team, because it seems like such a good hire.
Yeah. So that was a fun one. I was like, this is a record. I don't think I'm going to break this one.
Not to say that I just said everything is possible, but it's going to be hard to break that record. Again, nothing is impossible with the right candidate, with the right setting, energy and all, but wow, 48 hours, it's amazing. Okay. So when doing an interview, what are some things that you observe other than obviously the questions that you're going to ask? Is how you dress important? Is how you maintain eye contact important?
Yeah, so I will just say that we do all of our interviews virtually now, just because we found that that's just easier for our candidates and just scheduling purposes. So just want to give that caveat, because that can be a little bit different depending on if you're doing in-person or virtual. So one of the first things we notice is our background. So I don't think it's been as big of a struggle in the more recent years, but fresh out of COVID, there was some interesting backgrounds I was seeing. I had people in their bed, sitting in their bed, in their pajamas kind of thing. Yeah, doing an interview for a manager position. And, so you're kind of like, okay. So how you dress is important, but I would say it's not as important as it was even 5 years ago. Like 5 years ago, I think they would have expected a blazer in every single interview. Now we're just like, if you have a nice blouse on, a nice shirt, typically, collared, doesn't have to be, kind of just depends on how you, just kind of present yourself overall, making sure, of course, your hair and such is still groomed. I've had the messy people come in with a messy bun and kind of like an oversized baggy sweatshirt, and that's totally appropriate for a study sesh, but maybe not so much for an interview. So those are kind of just like the physical characteristics I first look at. And then I would say the other thing to kind of just be mindful of is try not to use your phone for an interview, or if you are using it, have it on a mounted thing. Because if you're holding it and doing an interview, my whole screen is just moving. And it actually can get almost nauseating at times, because you're trying to focus on the subject. Or I've had people, maybe they're outside or they're in their car. I don't necessarily 100% dock them for that. I just think, again, it just shows a lack of preparation for the interview. And so I can't help it in the back of my mind think, are you going to be a prepared leader? Are you going to take the time to plan appropriately for an activity or event or project. So again, don't necessarily 100% fault you, because you could totally blow it away or blow me away in the interview. But just those are little seeds of doubt, if you will. And then the interview itself. Yes, I think let your personality shine. You don't have to be as animated and over the top as I am. I don't expect that. I have a lot of energy, but still let your personality shine, right? Because sometimes I have people that are just like, yes, and this is, and it's just deadpan. In an industry like this, guests do not respond well to that. Trust me. I've gotten yelled at plenty of times just because of the slight way my voice sounds. And I'm like, this is just how I talk. This is just, I'm not using a tone. This is just my voice. So I can't even imagine putting that person in front of an angry guest and then just having them look emotionless, and not empathetic and disengaged, right? And guests do not respond well to that. So do show a smile, do have like at least a little bit of personality, because that is a big part of this industry. Now, outside of this industry, maybe not as big of an issue, but just, if you're going to be in this business, that is something I do encourage.
I mean, it really depends. I think that personality and smile go a long way in every industry, because I've had candidates that were interviewing for a press role in OysterLink, and they would be like, as you said, like no expression. And I'm like, you're going to have to reach out to people, and you're going to have to build relationships with journalists. Even just a very odd example, but the developers, when they come and build something for us, it's always nicer to talk to them when they have a smile than when they're like, yeah, whatever.
Oh, yes. We're going to go much farther if you have that ability to like connect and engage. I will say just a simple thing. It's so funny because at the beginning of all my interviews will say, hi, I'm Renee. And I've met some of the candidates before, not all, but I still always make sure to introduce myself. And I would say maybe 2% of them say, hi, I'm Abigail, or hi, and introduce themselves back. So many of them are like, okay. And I always am just like, and I understand that like the virtual space is a little bit like weird when it comes to kind of like what's your social etiquette, but that's just one of those small things that when they do introduce themselves back, that I'm always like, okay, cool. I don't know. It stands out, I think, just because it's a little bit different than I think the norm I've gotten used to.
Thank you so much. I just have a couple of questions, because I know that I would probably stay for 24 hours and ask you questions, but that's not possible. So let me ask you, as a candidate, as a person who has worked in several places and both front of house and now in the management, what are some employer green flags that you as a candidate should look for? How to recognize a good employer, someone where you're going to feel comfortable?
I think a big part is aligning with your personal values. So like something that I really like is like, I'm big on acting with like integrity, and my personal integrity is really big for me. And so I would say like, that's something I've appreciated with this company is if I think something's wrong, or if I'm not okay, like for example, I'll give you as an example of this. Several years ago, I worked with a chef, and on the menus that were printed, it said the dressing was a certain dressing, but what he was actually putting in, it was like a kind of packaged grab and go style outlet. And what the dressing that was in there was a totally different one. And I asked him, I said, this is not okay, because what if somebody has an allergy? And he kind of just was like, yeah, because I was very new at that job. So sometimes I didn't know when to not ruffle feathers, but I also like, again, have my personal integrity. And so I just went immediately to my director, didn't even go to my direct leader, which in hindsight probably should have, but and I said, I don't think this is okay. Food allergies are serious. We're opening ourselves up to liability. And I just like put my foot down, and the next day everything was changed. They like was back to how it should be. The correct dressing was put in there, because they weren't going to change all the menus that were in the guest rooms and things like that. And so those are things where it's like, I didn't get a slap on the hand for that or anything. I didn't get reprimanded. I didn't get retaliated against. Like some places I feel like would do that, right? I've worked in toxic restaurants before. And so I like that. And so I think making sure that you are aligning with a company that you feel good about, because it aligns with what you're interested in. Something I appreciate about Marriott is the put people first culture, and just there's so many people that have been with the company for 35, 45 years. And that longevity says something, right? At least to me. And that's part of why I've stayed, working in 5 cities, I think now with the company and across 3 states. That's the one thing that has remained kind of consistent is that the people that work here they're just good people. So again, like I've mentioned earlier, you spend so much of your life working, you might as well like what you're doing and who you're doing it with.
Exactly. You spend more time mostly at your work than with your friends and sometimes even family. Amazing. So 2 questions. One is, you just mentioned how you acted. Is that, would you say, type of behavior or some other skills that people should work on if they want to get promoted?
So I think advocating for yourself, yes. That is something ironically, I kind of learned in that voyage program. I was the first food and beverage voyager at my property, so they kind of were like still figuring out what the program was. It was still pretty new. And I was kind of feeling like, oh, I'm not getting like what I thought out of this. And I was feeling frustrated. And instead of saying anything, I was just feeling sorry for myself. And luckily we go to a conference and it's a lot of good networking with it. And I met people that were like, well, did you say anything? Have you spoken up at all? And I kind of felt silly. And I'm like, well, no. And I never had a problem with that before. But sometimes when you're entering your first, big job, it can be very intimidating and you're worried about like making the wrong impression. And so I kind of was like, you know what? Right. So I went back and with this renewed energy, and I started just putting things on people's calendars saying, you're going to teach me this day. You're going to teach me this day. And everyone was like, oh yeah, sure. There was no backlash. Everyone was totally fine with it. And so I kind of felt silly, and I'm like, why have I just not been speaking up for myself? So kind of, I learned that with that like Voyager program. And then when I segued into my next role, I kind of let my director know, like, this is my timeline. I want to be in this type of role by this date. This is like the next role after that. And, maybe in hindsight, somebody could have been like, were you threatening? And I'm like, no, I just was saying like, these are my expectations. This is what I know my worth is. And I will find it. If it's not here, I will go out and seek it. I just want you to know so you can successfully backfill my position and kind of mentally be prepared for that. It worked out because I ended up getting a promotion every time I wanted one there. Because again, I was advocating for myself, but you also have to deliver results at the same time. So, but yes, I would say that advocacy piece is something that a lot of people, especially the younger generation, I think, there's not as much like confrontation. It's so much digital confrontation, I feel like, is what we grew up with. And learning to kind of have really productive conversations is so important for career growth and your overall happiness too, because nobody is going to care about your career as much as you. Maybe your mom, but really like you are having to be the one that has to advocate for yourself.
Okay, amazing. So what is a realistic timeline for someone who is, let's say, starting out as a front desk agent to get like the first promotion? So people also have realistic expectations, because sometimes what we expect and what the realities are 2 different things. And then one last question is, how important is the job description when you're hiring as an employer and for the job seeker to understand?
Yeah, so I would say kind of starting kind of from, that whether it be a front desk position, your entry level position, I would say anywhere between like a year to 18 months would be like a good promotion timeline. And again, that's assuming you're really like standing out, you're getting good guest feedback, you're not getting written up, things like that. So I would say that's probably a decent timeline to expect, assuming you're ready to take like full-time employment, right? Maybe you're just not looking for that. That's fine too. And then as far as job description goes, I think I'm kind of hit or miss on this, because I think it really does depend on the company. But there are a lot of statistics out there that basically like minorities and women do not apply to jobs if they don't feel like they meet those minimum qualifications. And the reality is a lot of companies still will consider you even if you don't meet what that minimum qualifications are. I had seen this article and kind of we use a statistical insights website that gave us some feedback on that. And so I now kind of think anytime I'm looking at a job, I'm like, you know what, you should just apply because you never know. What's the worst it's going to do, right? Take 3 minutes out of your life. A lot of these applications are super, super fast. So yeah, so that's what I would kind of say. The job description is important, but I wouldn't get too caught up on it.
Amazing, Renee. This is, and I promise the last question and I'll let you go. I can see and hear the messages. What is the one thing, don't worry about it. What is the one thing you wish you knew before you started out in the hospitality industry?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think I would say, like, I wish I knew just more about how much you can grow. I kind of wish I would have maybe explored more avenues than just food and beverage, just to kind of get a little bit. I've done front office and food and beverage, but it would have been interesting to maybe try like a banquets role or maybe like doing a sales role or something like that. I think it's never too late, which is really cool. I think I always say this is an industry that you can have 5 midlife crises and still be working towards the the same like career progression. I mean, I had my first one when I segued from food and beverage operations into this role, so only 4 more to go. But I think that that's something I would have wished I would have looked into a little bit when I was younger, but I don't necessarily regret it. Just because you can still pivot, and it's not the end of the world. I know, especially when people are first starting their careers, they feel like this decision is going to totally map the rest of their life. And the reality is it's not. You have so much time in your life to pivot.
Amazing, Renee. Thank you very much.
Of course. Yes. Thank you.